Hey guys, so in this video I wanted to go over a really important concept with both squats and deadlifts, and this is basically how to fix center of mass issues on these. So basically what I'm talking about is on a squat, seeing that your knees are receding a lot out of the hole, say that you're starting to fall back a little bit too much onto your heels, or basically you're starting to tip over a little bit too much on your squat, how to fix that, as well as with the deadlift, starting to find that you get pulled forward when you basically are initiating a deadlift off the floor, or you're like basically not able to finish the lift because you're a little bit like too far behind the bar. So we have to understand when we are talking about these center mass issues on a squat, or a deadlift, this all has to happen with basically where we are starting off with our center mass, and this is a lot going to be dictated by our rib cage positioning and overall biomechanics. So what I mean by this is that if you're starting to notice that you have like basically like a shorter rib cage like myself, you're going to be more so like in a position where your shoulders are a little bit more pulled forward, a little bit more internally rotated. You're probably going to notice that you're going to be a little bit better or biased onto your heels on a squat or on a deadlift. This is actually beneficial on a deadlift because it's a hip hinge. We basically mostly need to drive through our hips and our backs on this, whereas on a squat it's going to be a little more deleterious. So we usually will see, the stripper squat where knees will recede fast out of the hole. This is because essentially we are really good at generating force through the back of our heels and through our posterior chain. Likewise, if you have more of a longer torso, you're more externally rotated at your shoulders, you're probably going to be a little bit more better at squatting because you're better able to keep that center mass forward, and on where it should be. You might struggle a little bit more with deadlift because you're not as good at exerting force in that position. Now we're talking about fixing this issue. I'm going to show some examples of this. If you are finding that you're starting to recede out of the hole with your knees on a squat, this means that you need to start with your center mass a little more forward onto your big toe. Basically feel your big toe a little bit more prior to going down in the squat. By starting with that, going down to the hole, we're going to basically improve our chances of finishing with our knees receding out of the hole. You're going to be able to feel more quads on the squat. Likewise, if we are noticing that we're starting to fall a little bit more forwards, we're noticing that we're tipping over a little bit too much, especially this is usually seen by, usually you're going to cut depth a lot because your weight's a little bit too far forward, and your torso is going to lean over a lot more. Just feel out your heels a little bit more prior to going down on the squat. That's going to fix that. And then with a deadlift, if you're noticing that say you start to initiate the deadlift, and your torso gets pulled forward off the floor and then it gets moving. This is very, very common. You actually need to start off with a little more pressure on the front of your foot, by a little more big toe pressure off the floor. Or if you're noticing, you actually, instead of like that torso tip, your torso gets like pulled forward more, like you go like this. You need to be a little bit more, you need to be a little bit more biased towards your heels, because that's going to allow you to basically stay with your torso over the bar. So basically you're not like losing as much energy with that torque and that inertia. I'm going to show some examples on like the video here in like another section, but this is really important to just understand. All right, guys, so a really good example of this, basically starting with your heels, a big weight too much back on your heels, and having that knee recession out of the hole is going to be my client Liam. This is going to be his top set. You can see how he comes out of the hole as basically you're going to see his hips shoot up, and he starts to get the squat bar, like he just tips over a lot. This is due to the fact he's starting a little bit too far back into his heels on a center mass. Basically, wherever you start with the bias of your center mass, you're going to go to that when you go down on the squat. Basically, how you fix this is prior to going down, Liam needs to basically feel out his big toe pressure and drive that through the floor. I struggle with this a lot, but you can see how I've sort of fixed that by basically cueing to keep my big toe pressure and more of my feet forward. My knees forward and feeling out a little bit more big toe pressure. Also, I'm a little more forward lean. I'm getting a lot less recession on my knees out of the hole. I'm going to still have some because of how I'm built, but it's a lot less. I'm able to drive up into the bar and use my back and my legs together instead of how I've used to do it, which is like back, basically turn like an all back as I was starting a little bit more far back onto my heels. So that's going to be, you're starting off. This is the most common one. It's going to start off a little bit too far back on your heels. You need to basically feel out some more of that big toe pressure. So this is going to be a good example of starting off a little bit too far back on the front, too far forward on your deadlift. You're going to see he kind of teeters back, and then he has to basically drive through his heels a little bit late. What you want to do in a scenario like this is basically drive through your heels a little bit more, because you can kind of see with the starting spot from right here. Ideally, you just go from right there, but what happens is he kind of gets pulled back, and then he has to start going up. So you want to drive through your heels a little bit more in a scenario like this. Another common one is going to be where you notice that you're starting to get tipped forward. You actually see this on my 711, where I tip forward a pretty decent amount off the floor. This is basically due to not having enough forward foot pressure. Well, how I would fix this is basically by biasing a little more off the floor, driving through my big toe and staying over that instead of biasing towards my heels as early. That's basically using a little bit more of my back instead of my back and my legs together. So that's going to be basically, the differences with, being a little more biased towards your heels, towards the front of your foot. You're going to see and also this is very commonly seen when people they don't actually set the bar down in a straight line, their knees kind of come forward like that. You can also see he gets pitched forward right as soon as he's doing that onto the front of his feet, and his heels kind of come off. So again, drive through your heels a little bit more off the floor there. Feel a little bit more in general, if you want to basically feel even foot pressure, but people based off of how they're built, again, like I mentioned earlier on, they are going to bias towards different things. Like Antonio has a really long torso. You can kind of see, and that's really what's going to happen. Whereas I have a short torso, I'm going to be a little bit more biased towards, not having enough forward foot pressure and getting a little bit more tipped over off the floor. All right, so the last example here is going to be having your pressure too far forward on the front of your feet. This is very commonly seen with people that use heels on their squat. We're very rarely going to see this with people using flats. It's mostly going to be people using heels. You can see how Angelo, he starts to cut depth a little bit too much on his second rep especially. You can see he's kind of getting pitched forward a little bit, and he starts to basically cut depth a little bit. Basically, let's go allow him to basically hit depth easier and be able to use his quads and his back a little bit more together, not feel as off balance, or the bar is also rolling up his back, is by driving in a little bit more through his heels as he's filling out his center of mass. And you can see we actually fixed this next week, where he's driving a little bit more through his. Actually, no, he's doing the same thing there. I'll take that back. This is not the next week. It's a little bit better, but you can still see how he's slightly biased forward a little bit too much, and needs to drive through his heels a little more so that he can't actually comfortably hit depth instead of cutting it slightly high. Basically, the reason why he's doing that is because if he goes down any lower, he's just going to fall off balance and just fall forward. So that's another example right there.